Hello mate, and welcome to Let's Code 4. This time it's personal. So we've had a couple of videos where we feel like we haven't written a great deal of code, but we've been doing a lot of thinking and just trying to remember to remind yourselves that the purpose of this series is not only to write a game engine, but to understand what we're doing as we're going along. So I know that the pace might feel like it's quite slow at the moment, but that's the reason why we're doing it. Okay, so moving forward, what we're going to do now is we're going to continue working on our default interaction. And what we've done now is we've created an image to display variable and we display that. And then what we're also doing is we're adding a multiplier so that we can decide whether or not our skill is going up or down dependent on what the character we're interacting with is likes or dislikes, really. So what we need to do in this one now is we actually need to create some stats that we're going to change. So let's have a look at how we can do that. So these types of interactions are going to be the kind of basic ones. You know, you can take someone for a coffee, or you can talk to them, or you can go for a run with them, or you can spar with them, or whatever. The only stat with regards to the character that we're interacting with that's going to change is going to be the affection. So let's just add some notes in here. These interactions only affect affection, but they also have some positive effects on our own stats, which is the thing that we're most interested in. So the more you talk to people, the better at talking you become, and so on and so forth. Now, there are other games out there in this genre that do not have that functionality, i.e. you build up your stats by going elsewhere, which we can have that functionality as well. But I like the idea of practice makes perfect. So, you know, you can go to school and learn how to swim, but until you actually go out there and start swimming and doing it properly for real, you know, on your own, kind of in the real world, that's where your skills really develop. So that's the theory behind what we're doing here. So what we can do is we can address the character that we have selected and adjust their stats pretty much straight away. So what we can do is say NPCs and then selected dot, and then we need to find out what the value is. Let's go up to our NPCs, and we have affection is a small a. So we can say dot affection, and somehow I've managed to put a curly bracket in there. And we're just going to put a $sign or a pound sign in there. NPC selected dot affection, and we can say plus equals, and then we could just add the skill multiplier, to be fair. I mean, it's going to make it very grindy if it only adds 1 point per interaction. But having said that, we also want the players to play the game for a while and to explore and try out different things. So if we make it too easy, then they're just going to do one thing over and over and over again, and that becomes very dull and boring. So on balance, I would say we're just going to do that. Make it nice and easy on ourselves. We're going to add the skill multiplier. So it's either going to go up or down dependent on whether the person we're interacting with likes what we're doing or not. And we're going to obviously have to report that to the player, but we'll do that at the bottom of the label because there are some other things that we want to do as well. Happy days. So realistically, what we also need to consider is that if the player we're interacting with doesn't like what we're doing, then they are going to react in a different way. So what we could do is take all of this code here and pop it down here, and we can change our image to display. In fact, yeah, brilliant idea. I'll undo that, because what we want to do is we want to pop this bit into the positive action like so, and then what we're going to do here, we're going to copy that. In fact, no, we'll have to copy this whole chunk, won't we? Control C, and we'll pop this in here as well. So if it's positive, we're going to just see a positive action. But if we are going to see if they're going to reject whatever we're doing, so we've got the who selected, but func click is now going to be null and void. And what we can do is just say reject.png. And then if that doesn't exist, it'll show the default again. But either way, now we've got that. Now we can actually say show image to display, Control X that one there. And we're going to paste that one there. Don't need that tabbed in. Perfect. Okay, so now the image that we are going to display is going to change depending on whether they like what we're saying or not. So we can get rid of this note text now, because what we've got is we need to decide what skills are going to be increased or decreased based on the action that we are performing. Just tidying up this code a little bit, get rid of all the extra spaces, we don't need them, like so. Remember to save your work as you go through as well. So I think we need to create some stats for our character now. So what we want to do is come into our defaults and defines, and we're going to create a new variable, default, and we'll call this player stats, and it's going to be a list, and I'll explain that why. We could create a different variable for each stat and increment and decrement those dependent on what button is selected, sorry, but that just creates another situation where we end up having to do multiple checks just to reference the right variable. What we can do though is we can create a list called player stats. So we're going to just copy that here, and we're going to reference it again here. And we're going to press the pound sign, Control V, player stats equals, and I could do this in the defaults to be fair, but I probably will, but we'll work down here and we'll explain it. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to have our stats as a situation where we're going to go. So the first stat, let's just call this one strength, and the value of that is going to be 0. Next one we could have is intelligence, and that's also going to be 0. I'm just going to change what kind of, just like to keep things nice and tidy like that. I don't think we need to overburden ourselves with too much in the way of stats. I think if we go too mad, we're just going to end up with a series of just unnecessary things in our memory. So what, strength, intelligence, and let's say social. And we'll give that 0 as well. So social kind of covers things like emotional interactions or whatever. Strength is obviously your physical prowess. I suppose we could go for agility as well, because strength and agility aren't necessarily the same thing. Or maybe just go for fitness. That's kind of a more all-encompassing. So strength and fitness are not necessarily the same thing. You might be able to lift a lot, but you can't walk up the stairs without getting out of breath. Intelligence kind of speaks for itself. Social is the more charismatic. In fact, yeah, let's change that to charisma. Strength, intelligence, charisma, fitness. What else do we want? Interesting. I think I just want to go with one more stat, basically. Yeah, strength, intelligence, charisma, fitness, empathy maybe? Yeah, empathy. And that's not spelled correctly either. Empathy, just the ability to kind of empathize with other human beings. Cool. So those are our stats. And now what we can do is we can actually reference these and increment the value following them. So the strength is 0, intelligence 0. It just makes life a little bit easier. So we can go through and say, find out what number in the list our strength is, and then if that's the case, we can increment the value after it. It's not the end of the world if we do it the other way around, where we just have a strength value, an intelligence value, a charisma value, fitness value, and empathy value. But we're trying to keep this code as modular as possible so that we don't have to keep redefining the same bit of code. So thinking that's probably the best way of doing this. Yeah. So I think the next thing we want to do is to define a list. Again, another list, yep, lots of lists in this, that define what kind of action affects what kind of stats. So for example, doing something physical is going to affect your strength. Doing something emotional will obviously affect your empathy, so on and so forth. And what we can do is we've got options. We can go with the type of interaction, but the problem is that physical encompasses playing and working out. Now, working out can mean many different things. So what I think we'll do is we'll actually choose what stat is going to be impacted by adding a value to our interact buttons. And then we can just add a stat. That just makes life a little bit easier for us in the long run. We haven't got to mess around. So in fact, we won't create a list. I misspoke. What we're going to do is we're going to add another new value to our interaction buttons at the end, which is just going to be our stat. And that was a quick memory test because what we've already got in our UI button is a stat. So we don't even have to mess around there. We've already added that value, so we don't need to change our class at all. All we need to do is actually input those values into the relevant buttons. So here we hop back to our defaults and defines, and this string here is actually our stat. So talking is a neutral action, but I would say that talking is going to affect charisma. So let's just copy that and paste that in there like so. Flirting is probably going to be a charismatic thing as well, so we'll pop that in there. Playing could be fitness, it could be strength. I'm going to go with fitness because it's more likely to be a cardio workout than a strength workout. Fighting is going to be I want to say fitness as well, only because it just makes more sense to me that if you're fighting, you're getting more cardio fitness than you are strength, but it could be both. But we'll just leave it as fitness for now. Eating doesn't really impact anything, so we'll leave that. But if you're eating with a person, then that's probably going to be an empathy thing because you're talking. So we'll just pop that in there, that's fine. And then working out, we're going to assume that working out with weights is the name of the game, so we'll input strength into there. Like so. And then again, as we add more buttons, then we have the ability to change those stats more, but we'll just leave those as they are for the moment. Now what we want to do is reference, or rather compare, the action that we are doing with the archetype and our stats so that we can actually add them. So what we currently have is our skill multiplier plus and -1, which is great because we can reuse that value. So now what we need to do is we need to actually go through our stats and add them depending on what we've got selected. So what we need to do is we need to first find out which member of the list our stat is. Sounds a little bit complicated, but it's not really that difficult. All we have to do is say stat int, so we're getting an index for that, and then we can say equals, and then we're going to say player stats dot index, and that's going to return the index number of whatever it is we're selecting. And now we need to create another variable, because I think what we want, rather than having nested references, we'll keep our references nice and simple. So we're going to say interact buttons, so we're going to reference the buttons that we've got selected, and we're going to say action selected dot stat. So we can say stat str equals there. So we now, this is whatever the stat is of the button that we've got selected. So we'll just copy that and paste that into there. And that's going to return the index. And now what we have to do is just add +1. Because if you look at the list, if we've got a button selected that has charisma as our stat that we're going to change, it's going to return 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is 4, but we actually want to change this value, so we have to put +1. because that's the value that we're going to change, like so. So there we go. So we can use stat string because that's a string that's going to read charisma if we've got a charisma button selected. So we can use that value when we return to the player, or whether we tell the player which stat is changing. And now we have to say player stats. Change that. That's an actual pound sign, not a dollar sign. There we go. It's player stats. Stat int plus equals. Yeah, there we go. Plus equals skill multiplier. Cool. Okay. So regardless of whether or not the person that we are talking to liked the interaction, we're still going to get some experience for doing it. So our stat is going to increase, which is great. So now what we need to do is we actually need to tell the player what's happened. And the simplest way of doing that is we could use a pop-up screen, which we might do further down the line. But for now, all we have to do is we're just going to put it on the screen. Nice and simple. So let's just say here. So first off, we need to get the name of the person that we've got selected. And currently we have an integer of who's selected rather than the name, but we do have the ability to access that name from down here. Who is selected gives us the nice name, so we're going to say who is selected. So we can say we'll just give ourselves that. Hopefully that'll work. If it doesn't, we can just create a value. That's no problem. In fact, what I'll do, make this life easier, we'll go there. In fact, I think I might need to actually define this as a variable and display it later. But we'll test run this, see if it likes it, and if it doesn't, we'll change the way we do it. In fact, what I want to do, yeah, we'll define this as a string. Yeah, brilliant idea. Control-X, we'll define this as a string up here in our if statement if they liked it or didn't like it. So this is currently output text. I know I've got the capital P where I don't need one, so we'll go output text equals the name of the person we've got selected. And had enjoyed that. And then we can say +1 affection. And we can put that in a different color or something if we want to. And we can now just say format. Open brackets. Who is selected? Oops. No. Let's come back to our classes. Get the name of that. Who is selected. There we go. So that's what that text is going to read. And we'll just copy that and we're going to paste this back down here. And we'll say didn't enjoy that. -1 affection. That's cool. And now we can create another bit of text to say whatever stat we've increased is increased, yada, yada, yada. So now we want to put in another output text. So we'll say output text B. Remember our $ output text B equals. And we're going to go with right there. Has slightly increased. Yeah, that works for me. And then we'll say .format. And then we need stat string. Slightly increased. And now we can append this to the end of, in fact, yeah, what I'm going to do is a new line. Is it that way? Yeah, pretty sure it is. And then we'll just say output text plus equals output text B. Get rid of that capital P in there. That doesn't need to be in there. That's cool. And then the last piece of the puzzle is to give ourselves a Ren'Py.say open brackets, no one's saying it, so we'll say none there, comma, and then output text there, like so. And now we need to hide our image with a dissolve as well once we click on the button. So we'll just copy that, Control C, paste that there, change that to hide, and then return. In fact, let's just pop a space in there and one in there. Alrighty, let's talk through everything that we've done over the last few videos. So we've defined a blank image to display variable. We've also got the integer value of the archetype of the character that we've got selected. So we know the integer value of the archetype. Now we're going into if the button that we've got selected has a type that matches our archetypes, integer value of our archetype. So we're referencing the archetypes list and we're saying if the type's value of the button we've got selected is contained within the specific archetype, then we're going to say that that has a positive effect. So if the character that we've got selected likes what we're doing, then it's going to have a positive effect, which means we're going to reference a image file of a positive response to whatever it is we're doing. So for example, if we're shaking their hand and they like it, then we'll show an image of us shaking their hand. If that image doesn't exist, then we will display a default. And what we need to do is just drop that down there because that is not conditional on whether or not the file exists. So good job we went through and looked at this afterwards. We're also defining a text string that's saying the name of the person that we have selected, referencing our whoisSelected value based on the class that we created here, where we check who have we got selected. This was originally meant for us to be able to debug, but we've managed to find a use for it. So pretty good. If they don't like what we're doing, then the multiplier is going to be -1. We're going to show an image of them rejecting us. This might change a little bit because we might have to take into account if they're wearing different outfits or something like that. But for now, it works fine. And we're saying if that image is not available, then we will show the default. Next thing we need to do is create another string of text which says name didn't enjoy this -1 affection. Fine. It's going to show that image with a dissolve. Next thing we're doing is we're adding or subtracting from the affection of that character. We will put some kind of clamp on there, so if it's already 0, it can't go any lower. If it's already maxed out, it can't go any higher, only because we might require it to be within the specific range. Next thing, we're going to find our stat string. So the name of the stat that we're changing is simply interact buttons action selected stat, because as you remember, in our defaults and defines, we now have those strings added in there, and they are identical to the strings that we have within our player stats list. We're also going to get the integer value of the player stats, i.e. if we're doing charisma, then we're going to get the integer value of the value that corresponds to it. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 is the index of charisma, and then we're adding 1. So we're going to change this one. Now that we've got those things, what we can do is we can actually add or subtract values, but we're only going to be adding because you only get positive XP for doing different actions there, like so. And then we're going to add another bit of code which says the stat name has slightly increased, and then we're going to mash those two bits of text together and then output those in our dialog window with nobody saying it. I might create a character for outputting things like that, call it like text warning or something like that, but for now that works. Then we're hiding our image, then we're closing our label. Long bit of development in this label, but hopefully by this point you will understand how it works and what we're doing, and we will be able to continue with creating more code in the next video. But until then, you take damn good care of yourselves, alright? Bye bye.